U.S. Virgin Islands, August 2019. Caribbean sunlight reflects off turquoise water. Federal agents arrive at a private island 2 miles from civilization where authorities had never been granted access. Inside the compound, investigators find evidence of what prosecutors would later describe as a systematic criminal enterprise. For over 2 decades, this 72-acre property remained hidden from scrutiny. The world would come to know it by many names. The survivors remember it differently. The year is 1998. Jeffrey Edward Epstein, a 45-year-old financier whose sources of wealth remain disputed, purchases Little St. James Island for $7.95 million. The island sits in the Caribbean Sea, protected by geography and isolation. 2 miles of open water separate it from St. Thomas. No public roads provide access. No neighboring properties offer oversight. Epstein announces plans for private development. What emerges over the following years becomes central to federal criminal investigations. Construction crews arrive by boat. Helicopters transport materials. Over the next decade, a compound takes shape across the tropical landscape. Not a single residence, but an extensive complex designed in Danish villa style, with multiple structures arranged around a central courtyard. The main villa rises against green hillsides. 2 swimming pools occupy the grounds. A bathhouse promises privacy. Staff quarters, observation structures, and recreational facilities. Each building serves specific purposes within what authorities would later describe as a criminal operation. But one structure draws particular attention from investigators. On the island's southeastern point, workers construct an unusual building painted in blue and white stripes, topped with a gold dome. Epstein submits architectural plans to Virgin Islands authorities, designating it as a music pavilion. The approved permits show an octagonal structure with specific dimensions. What actually gets constructed differs significantly from submitted plans, a rectangular building rising 30 feet instead of the permitted 10, with no windows matching the original design. The gold dome is later destroyed by Hurricane Maria in 2017. The structure remains standing, becoming a focal point of investigative interest and public speculation. By 2016, Epstein expands his holdings, purchasing the neighboring Great St. James Island, 165 acres, for $22.5 million. His Caribbean properties now span over 230 acres. Flags fly over the compound. Decorative statues mark the grounds. A boat dock labeled LSJ serves as the primary access point. From external observation, the property appears to be a luxury estate. Federal prosecutors would later present evidence suggesting otherwise. To understand the criminal case, one must examine the individual at its center. Jeffrey Epstein began his professional life as a mathematics teacher at Manhattan's Dalton School. He transitioned into finance, eventually establishing connections with wealthy individuals. He claimed to manage assets exclusively for clients with net worth exceeding $1 billion. By the 1990s, Epstein had cultivated relationships across multiple sectors: business, academia, politics, and entertainment. He positioned himself as a philanthropist and financial advisor. He made donations to educational institutions and scientific research. He hosted social gatherings attended by influential individuals. Behind this public persona, according to federal prosecutors and court testimony, Epstein was operating a criminal enterprise involving the exploitation of underage victims. Recent document releases in 2024 and 2025 have revealed the extent of Epstein's social connections. Flight logs from his private aircraft show various high-profile passengers over the years. It is important to note that being documented on flight logs does not indicate knowledge of or participation in any criminal activity. Many individuals had legitimate business or social contact with Epstein before his crimes became public knowledge. Among those documented in various records are former presidents, members of foreign royal families, business executives, scientists, and entertainment figures. The vast majority of these individuals have denied any knowledge of illegal activities, have never been charged with crimes, and maintain they had limited contact with Epstein or ended associations once concerns arose. The question that emerges from these connections is not about individual guilt, which must be proven in court, but about how someone engaged in criminal activity maintained access to powerful circles for so long. Epstein's wealth itself remains a subject of dispute. The exact sources of his fortune have never been definitively established. Financial experts have questioned the legitimacy of his claimed business model. In a 2018 interview with a journalist, Epstein made claims about possessing information regarding various individuals. These claims have not been independently verified. His legal team once suggested he had connections to intelligence agencies. No evidence has confirmed this assertion. What has been confirmed through court proceedings, victim testimony, and federal investigations is that Jeffrey Epstein was convicted in 2008 of solicitation charges involving a minor and was later charged in 2019 with federal crimes, including conspiracy and exploitation of underage victims spanning multiple years and locations. Court documents and witness testimony describe how the criminal operation functioned across Epstein's properties, including Little St. James. According to testimony, Epstein would travel to St. Thomas via private aircraft. From the airport, helicopters registered to his company would transport passengers to the island. The property's private ownership prevented casual public access. Local authorities later stated that attempts to visit the island for official purposes were discouraged or denied. It wasn't a situation where a young person would be able to leave easily and seek help, U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General Denise George later explained in court filings. The island's geography created isolation. Steve Scully, who worked as an IT contractor on Little St. James from 1999 to 2005, later provided testimony about his observations during over 100 visits to install telecommunications equipment. Scully stated he witnessed concerning situations that eventually led him to terminate his business relationship, despite the financial benefits. In interviews with investigators, Scully described an environment that troubled him deeply. He reported seeing young females who appeared to be minors present on the property without apparent supervision. He observed behavior that seemed inappropriate given their apparent ages. Scully described Epstein as extremely controlling and particular. He noted unusual details, such as stockpiles of identical clothing that was worn once and discarded. The gym facilities and other areas contained materials that raised concerns. The compound's design, according to later analysis by investigators, included features that could facilitate isolation and control. Multiple separate structures meant individuals could be kept apart. Underground spaces provided privacy from observation. The property's layout dispersed activities across various locations. Court testimony from victims describes attempts to leave the island. The surrounding ocean created a natural barrier. Transportation on and off the property was controlled. One survivor testified about feeling trapped with no viable escape options. The isolation was deliberate. The control was systematic. For years, residents of nearby St. Thomas were aware of rumors. Local charter boat operator Jim Query later recalled that community members knew Epstein had a previous conviction, knew about a controversial legal outcome in 2008. The island had earned an unflattering nickname locally long before national attention arrived. But the wealth, the legal representation, the influential connections, these created barriers beyond physical ones. When financial considerations override ethical judgment, Steve Scully reflected in later interviews, expressing regret about continuing to work for Epstein despite growing concerns. Moral clarity becomes compromised. By the time federal authorities executed search warrants in 2019, technological evidence would reveal that approximately 200 mobile devices had connected to networks on the island over multiple years. Investigators would seize computers, financial records, and extensive documentation that prosecutors described as evidence of organized criminal activity spanning more than 2 decades. Jeffrey Epstein did not operate alone. Federal prosecutors identified Ghislaine Noel Marion Maxwell as a key participant in the criminal enterprise. Born December 25, 1961, Maxwell came from a background of wealth and privilege. She was the daughter of British media proprietor Robert Maxwell. She received elite education and moved within high social circles internationally. After her father's death in 1991, she became closely associated with Epstein in what prosecutors would later characterize as a criminal partnership. According to court testimony and federal charging documents, Maxwell played a central role in recruiting victims. Witnesses described her approaching young females in various locations, shopping areas, educational settings, public spaces. She would establish trust, sometimes befriending families. She presented opportunities that seemed legitimate: educational programs, career advancement, mentorship. Survivors describe a deliberate process. Maxwell would build relationships over time. She would create situations that seemed appropriate initially. She would gradually normalize concerning behavior. And according to victim testimony, she would facilitate access for Epstein to commit crimes. Federal prosecutors presented evidence that Maxwell's involvement went beyond recruitment. At trial, 4 women provided testimony about their experiences as teenagers. Due to the sensitive nature of this content, specific details will not be described here, but court transcripts are publicly available for those seeking complete information. A witness identified in court only as Jane described abuse beginning at age 14, with Maxwell present during some incidents. A witness identified as Kate testified she was 17 when exploitation began. She described how Maxwell created false trust before that trust was violated. A witness named Carolyn testified that she was 14 when Maxwell recruited her, using another victim to make initial contact, a pattern that prosecutors described as common in the operation, where earlier victims became unwitting participants in recruiting others. Annie Farmer, who uses her real name and advocates publicly for survivors, testified she was 16 when she experienced abuse at one of Epstein's properties. She continues working to ensure all sealed documents and evidence are made public. In December 2021, a federal jury convicted Ghislaine Maxwell of multiple counts, including conspiracy to commit crimes involving minors. In June 2022, she received a sentence of 20 years in federal prison. She is currently incarcerated in a facility in Texas. Maxwell has filed appeals and has reportedly sought executive clemency. Survivors and victim advocates oppose any reduction in her sentence. Even with Maxwell imprisoned and Epstein deceased, questions remain about others who may have had knowledge of or involvement in the criminal operation. Federal investigations have continued, but no additional individuals have been charged in connection with the core conspiracy. In 2008, Jeffrey Epstein faced what should have been severe federal consequences. Instead, he received a sentence that allowed him to continue criminal activity for 11 more years. Understanding how this occurred reveals significant issues within the justice system. By 2006, local law enforcement in Palm Beach, Florida, had conducted extensive investigation into allegations that Epstein had committed crimes against multiple underage victims at his Florida residence. Evidence was substantial. Victims had provided testimony. Documentation existed of financial transactions. The case moved to federal prosecutors. Alexander Acosta, then serving as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, oversaw what appeared to be a straightforward federal case. Instead, Acosta and his team negotiated an agreement with Epstein's legal representatives. The terms were highly unusual. Epstein would plead guilty to reduced state-level charges, not federal charges. He would serve time in a county jail with work release privileges, not in federal prison. Critically, the agreement included a non-prosecution provision that would prevent federal charges against any potential co-conspirators. Additionally, victims were not informed of this agreement until after it was finalized, a violation of the Crime Victims' Rights Act. In 2008, Epstein entered Palm Beach County Jail. He served 13 months. For 12 hours daily, 6 days per week, he was permitted to leave on work release, making his incarceration significantly less restrictive than standard detention. He registered as an offender and made financial settlements with some victims. Following his release, he resumed his lifestyle. He continued using his properties, including the island. According to later evidence, criminal activity continued. The agreement remained relatively unknown to the general public until investigative journalist Julie K. Brown published a detailed series in the Miami Herald in 2018 titled Perversion of Justice. The reporting sparked immediate controversy across political perspectives. Questions arose about the justification for such lenient terms, the protection of unidentified individuals, and the legal reasoning behind decisions that appeared to prioritize the defendant over victims. Acosta later served as United States Secretary of Labor under President Trump, resigning in 2019 when the controversy intensified. In 2025 congressional testimony, Acosta defended his decisions, characterizing the original case as legally uncertain and claiming he achieved the best outcome possible under the circumstances. A 2020 Department of Justice Inspector General report concluded that Acosta and other prosecutors exercised poor judgment but had not violated laws in their handling of the case. Victims and their advocates view the situation differently. The 2008 agreement gave Epstein 11 additional years. 11 more years during which, according to later evidence and testimony, exploitation continued. 11 more years of a criminal enterprise protected by a legal agreement that valued resolution over justice. During the same period, Acosta was negotiating this agreement. Epstein was expanding his island compound, tripling the main residence, adding facilities, and developing infrastructure. An individual who faced serious federal charges was instead investing in long-term property development. July 6, 2019. Teterboro Airport, New Jersey. Jeffrey Epstein's private aircraft lands after returning from international travel. Federal agents are waiting. This time, the charges were federal and serious: conspiracy and exploitation involving multiple underage victims. The alleged crimes spanned from 2002 to 2005. Epstein faced potential decades in federal prison. Federal prosecutors had identified over 80 victims. Evidence obtained from Epstein's Manhattan residence included compromising photographs, financial records documenting payments, and extensive documentation that prosecutors characterized as evidence of systematic criminal activity. Later estimates from victim advocates suggest the total number of individuals affected could exceed 1,000. Epstein was denied bail and transferred to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan to await trial. Then, on August 10, 2019, 35 days after his arrest, Jeffrey Epstein was found deceased in his cell. The official determination: suicide. However, the circumstances surrounding his death generated significant public skepticism that continues today. Epstein had reportedly been placed on monitoring protocols following an earlier incident 3 weeks prior. Guards assigned to conduct regular welfare checks were later found to have been asleep and to have falsified documentation claiming they had performed their duties. Security camera systems that should have recorded the area experienced technical failures. 2 correctional officers, Tova Knoll and Michael Thomas, were subsequently charged with conspiracy and records falsification. Both ultimately entered guilty pleas. Public reaction was substantial. The phrase "Epstein didn't kill himself" became widespread on social media, reflecting doubt about the official account. Unverified theories circulated suggesting that influential associates might have orchestrated his death to prevent testimony. Multiple official investigations have been conducted. The medical examiner's office determined the death was consistent with suicide. A 2023 Department of Justice Inspector General report documented numerous failures by Bureau of Prisons personnel, but found no evidence supporting theories of foul play. In 2025, a review conducted under the Trump administration again confirmed the suicide determination and stated no hidden client list exists beyond documents already in evidence. For survivors, Epstein's death carried different significance. There would be no trial. There would be no public testimony under oath. There would be no opportunity to confront him in court. There would be no potential testimony identifying other participants in the criminal enterprise. "We wanted accountability through the legal system," one survivor stated to media. "We wanted the judicial process. Instead, we received more uncertainty." Attorney General William Barr, speaking from the Department of Justice, stated, "Any co-conspirators should not rest easy. Victims deserve justice and will get it." 2 days later, federal action began on Little St. James. August 12, 2019. Dawn breaks over the Caribbean. Federal agents arrive by boat at Little St. James Island. For more than 2 decades, official access to the property had been restricted. That restriction ended. Video footage captured by individuals on a nearby charter vessel shows multiple agents conducting operations across the compound. The task force, coordinated by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, had obtained authorization to execute search warrants. Kelly Quinn, operating a charter boat that morning, observed the operation. "We were in the area for recreational purposes," she told reporters, and suddenly witnessed a significant law enforcement action. Inside the compound, agents secured multiple computers and digital devices. Desktop systems, laptops, and electronic storage media were documented and removed. Physical documents, financial records, and photographic materials were seized. The volume of material required substantial transportation resources. Legal analysts noted an important procedural aspect. With Epstein deceased, legal challenges to search and seizure procedures were significantly reduced. Materials that might have been contested in court became accessible to investigators. Manhattan U.S. Attorney Jeffrey S. Berman issued a public statement emphasizing that investigations continued. To those brave individuals who have already come forward, and to the many others who have yet to do so, let me reiterate that we remain committed to standing for you, and our investigation of the conduct charged in the indictment, which included a conspiracy count, remains ongoing. Analysis of digital evidence later revealed that approximately 200 mobile devices had connected to networks on the island across multiple years. Some belonged to employees, others remained unidentified in public reporting. The technological evidence provided investigators with information about patterns of activity and potential additional witnesses or participants. Survivors began sharing their experiences publicly, contributing to understanding the scope and impact of the criminal enterprise. Virginia Giuffre, one of the most prominent survivors speaking publicly, has stated she was 17 when she was recruited. She has alleged exploitation by multiple individuals and has pursued legal action in civil courts. In 2022, she reached a settlement in a lawsuit against Prince Andrew, who has consistently denied all allegations and was never criminally charged. The settlement terms remain confidential. Virginia continues advocating for trafficking survivors globally. Annie Farmer has been particularly active in seeking transparency. She testified at Maxwell's trial about her experiences at age 16. Today, Annie advocates before legislative bodies, demanding the release of all sealed documents related to the case. Transparency serves justice, she tells lawmakers. Every sealed file potentially protects someone who should answer questions. Maria Farmer and her sister have both publicly discussed their allegations. Maria reported concerns to federal authorities in 1996, years before Epstein's first arrest. No action was taken at that time. She now works to ensure focus remains on documented facts rather than unverified speculation. A witness who testified under the name Carolyn described years of exploitation beginning at age 14. She was recruited through another victim, a pattern prosecutors identified as systematic, where earlier victims were manipulated into facilitating access to new victims. The psychological impact of this pattern is profound, as survivors carry not only their own trauma but also complicated feelings about any role they were forced to play. The scale of victimization continues to emerge. Investigative journalist Julie K. Brown's Miami Herald reporting identified over 80 victims. Recent estimates from victim advocacy organizations suggest the true number could exceed 1,000 individuals affected over more than 20 years. Many have not spoken publicly. Some never will. The barriers to coming forward, trauma, shame, fear of disbelief, privacy concerns, remain significant. In 2022, the U.S. Virgin Islands secured a $105 million settlement from Epstein's estate for crimes committed on Little St. James. J.P. Morgan Chase reached a $290 million settlement in 2023 related to allegations the bank facilitated Epstein's activities through provision of banking services, despite warning signs. Deutsche Bank settled for $75 million on similar grounds. Financial settlements cannot undo harm. Monetary compensation cannot restore what was taken, but survivors continue pursuing accountability through available legal mechanisms, demanding transparency, and calling for the release of sealed grand jury materials and investigative files. I represent one story among potentially 1,000, survivor Danielle Bensky stated in 2025. She was 17 when she encountered Jeffrey Epstein in 2004. Consider that number carefully, 1,000 individuals affected. Little St. James remains largely unchanged physically today. The structures stand, the grounds are maintained, the blue-striped building remains visible from passing boats. In May 2023, both Little St. James and Great St. James were sold to Stephen Dekoff, founder of investment firm Black Diamond Capital Management, for $60 million, substantially below the original listing price of $125 million. Dekoff announced intentions to develop a luxury resort on the properties, with anticipated opening in 2025. This planned transformation raises complex questions. Can locations associated with documented crimes be rehabilitated through renovation? Should sites of systematic harm be preserved as historical reminders or redeveloped to serve new purposes? What responsibility exists to inform future visitors about a location's history? Individuals who accessed the property without authorization in 2020 and 2021 documented structures frozen in time. Furniture remained in place, facilities stood unused. The infrastructure that supported criminal activity for 2 decades awaited its next chapter. Legal proceedings continue. Survivors pursue civil litigation against Epstein's estate and entities they allege enabled his activities. In January 2024, unsealed court documents revealed numerous names mentioned in various contexts throughout the case. It is essential to understand that these documents do not constitute a client list, as some media characterize them. Rather, they include individuals mentioned in depositions, testimony, and legal filings for various reasons. Many had legitimate professional or social contact with Epstein before his crimes were exposed. Being named in legal documents does not indicate wrongdoing. In February 2025, the Department of Justice released flight manifests from Epstein's aircraft. Multiple high-profile names appear in these logs. Again, it is critical to emphasize, presence on flight logs does not prove knowledge of or participation in any criminal activity. Many passengers have provided explanations for their travel, have never been charged with crimes, and have cooperated with any investigations. Pressure continues for complete disclosure. Survivors and advocates demand release of all grand jury materials, all investigative files, and all sealed documents that might reveal the full scope of Epstein's network and activities. Some materials remain classified for reasons that have not been publicly explained. Some documents are sealed by court order. Some evidence remains in government custody, cataloged but not released. Significant questions remain without definitive answers. Who else, if anyone, participated in or actively enabled the criminal enterprise beyond Epstein and Maxwell? While Maxwell was convicted, investigations into others have not resulted in additional charges. What information exists in the evidence seized by federal agents? Computers, financial records, and extensive documentation were obtained from multiple properties. Much of this material has not been made public. What were the exact circumstances of Epstein's death? Despite multiple official investigations confirming suicide, public skepticism persists due to the unusual failures in protocol that occurred. What were the true sources of Epstein's wealth? The financial foundation of his lifestyle has never been comprehensively explained or verified. What did individuals in his social and professional network know, and when did they know it? This question applies broadly and does not assume guilt but rather asks about awareness and response to warning signs. What remains sealed in court records and investigative files? Substantial materials are not accessible to the public, and the justifications for sealing these materials are not always clear. Were there additional locations beyond the known properties where crimes occurred? Epstein owned residences in multiple cities and countries. Whether all sites have been identified remains uncertain. What was the actual purpose of the distinctive building on Little St. James? While officially designated as a music pavilion, its use remains subject to speculation rather than confirmed evidence. The property will undergo transformation. The buildings will be renovated. New guests will arrive, possibly unaware of the location's history. Economic development will move forward, as it typically does, but the survivors remain present. Their experiences remain real. Their demand for accountability continues. Little St. James serves as a case study in how wealth, power, and geographic isolation can enable systematic criminal activity against vulnerable individuals. Jeffrey Epstein's operation, according to prosecutors and victim testimony, exploited potentially over 1,000 individuals across more than 20 years. The operation persisted due to multiple factors: a network of enablers, a controversial legal outcome in 2008 that allowed continued activity, and social structures that sometimes value discretion and reputation protection over victim safety and justice. While Epstein is deceased and Maxwell is incarcerated, the full story remains incomplete. Every sealed document, every unanswered question, every investigation that produced no charges, these represent accountability deferred. The survivor's message is consistent. Money, power, and death should not terminate the pursuit of truth and justice. Their advocacy continues. The questions persist. The location remains a reminder. Truth may be obscured, but documentation exists. History will record Little St. James not as a tropical paradise, but as a location where systems designed to protect the vulnerable failed repeatedly. The survivors work to ensure this history is not forgotten or minimized. They demand continued attention. They insist that difficult questions be asked and answered. Because on a private island, separated from oversight by geography and wealth, crimes occurred that should prompt examination of institutional failures. Until all questions that can be answered are answered, until all individuals who bear responsibility are identified through proper legal process, until all survivors who seek justice have access to it, the story of Little St. James remains unfinished. Subscribe to Dark History, uncovered for investigations into cases where the truth demands telling.